I'm Gareth from Park Cameras, and today we're looking at the Sony A7R III, how it's different from the A7 III, why it's more expensive, and what it does. You can watch our A7 III video by clicking the link just up in the corner there. So it's important right away to say that both the new A7 III and the A7R III are pretty similar to look at. They have the same design, the same button layout, they're roughly the same size and same weight, so they're pretty easy to both just pick up and go. They're pretty easy to just walk around with all day. They're both full frame cameras. They both have an electronic shutter with silent shooting available, so that's me taking 10 frames per second continuous, just in silence. Speaking of which, they both shoot 10 frames per second, continuous, in RAW, in silence. They both shoot Full HD 1080p video at up to 120 frames per second. They both shoot in 4K. They take the same battery. They both have 2 memory card slots and Wi-Fi capabilities. So it's fair to say that there's quite a few similarities between the two, but there's some big differences as well. So the A7R III has a hugely impressive 42.4 megapixel sensor. So that means that you can crop right into the image without really losing any detail. So that's great if you like cropping right in, if you do wildlife or landscape or something like that and you need to crop in, or if you're going to be blowing these pictures up to something huge, that's great. You're not going to lose any detail. The image is really rich and packed full of detail, so that's really handy. Sony also say you can get up to 15 stops of dynamic range with this camera, which means that the sensor in this camera is the best sensor that they've produced for any of their mirrorless cameras when it comes to resolution and dynamic range. So the A7R III has slightly fewer autofocus points. It still boasts 399 autofocus points though, so it's nothing to be ashamed of, just it is a bit less than the A7 III. It does still have things like eye autofocus, and to be honest, using it all day, I didn't really notice much of a difference. It's still really quick and really fast. Both cameras feature 5-axis stabilization, but the A7R III has a slightly more advanced type of stabilization, which means it's great for handheld photography, handheld video, or low light situations. Both cameras can shoot 10 frames a second in RAW and in silence if you turn the silent mode on, but because of the resolution, the A7R III has a slightly smaller buffer, which is totally fair enough considering that the megapixel count is so much higher. It's still pretty impressive though. It's still got a buffer of 76 compressed RAWs, which to be honest is really not too bad. The electronic viewfinder is a little bit different. So the A7R III uses an OLED screen with a slightly better resolution and a better refresh rate, which to be honest makes it slightly easier to focus in manual focus when looking through the viewfinder. And the rear screen is also a slightly better resolution as well. So both cameras can shoot 4K at up to 30 frames a second, but there are some differences here when it comes to format and quality. So the new A7 III will shoot 4K using the full width of the sensor. So that means it's essentially giving the equivalent of 6K and then downsampling that to 4K. This works at 24 frames a second and 25 frames a second, and then at 30 it crops by 1.2. Now with the A7R III, it's best shooting 4K on the APS-C mode or the Super 35 mode, which crops in a little bit, but that essentially gives you 5K and downsamples that to 4K. You can shoot on the full width of the sensor, but The detail is slightly less good. It's just a slightly noticeably less good image compared with the A7 III, and there is visibly more noise when you're using higher ISO. So something to consider if you like shooting video in 4K. Both cameras can shoot in S-Log2 and S-Log3 though, so no differences there. So based on the specs, both cameras are really nice and give you a really good option for a mirrorless camera. The A7 III is a bit more of a well-rounded, more balanced system. It's great for stills, great for video, packed full of features. The A7R III, same sort of thing, great for stills, great for video, but it is probably focused a little bit more towards that photographer's camera with that huge resolution, huge megapixel count, which means that if you like to crop in or if you like to blow your pictures up, so for example if you're into wildlife photography or landscape photography, fine art photography, stuff like that, it's going to be a really useful tool to have that huge resolution to play with. Just gives you the ability to reframe things afterwards and not lose any detail, which is nice. As always, if you have any questions about either camera, pop a comment down below and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe for more content, and as always, thanks for watching.